Automated Podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. So when we typically talk about automation, I think that people think about robots or some sort of physical piece of equipment that really replaces human work. And hopefully this podcast has expanded that view for you. But in case it hasn't as of yet, today's discussion should help with that. So in my conversation with Sunil Ranka, the founder of Predikly, we talk about robotic process automation and how businesses today are able to automate certain aspects of their operations and what kind of impacts as well as benefits are experienced for both the business as well as the employees. We also take a look at the future of work as it relates to automation and discuss the interesting idea of hyperautomation. So in the last 17 years, Sunil has built solutions on more than $10 billion worth of businesses, several being Fortune 500 companies. He is a founder of Predikly, which is a data and automation solutions company that has over 100 employees and has automated 600 processes within industries like healthcare, finance, HR, and many more. So Sunil thrives to solve any platform, application, and data-related problem. And as a venture partner at znationlab, which is a startup accelerator, Sunil mentors and helps grow young products as well as startups. With his vast experience and background with data and technology, he helps organizations to define data platforms, strategy, and solutions, helping organizations drive better business practices, which in turn positively impacts their bottom line. And I was really happy to have Sunil on the podcast today to discuss both of his insights as well as experience when it comes to automation and how it impacts businesses and what the future of automation might look like for several of those businesses. Thank you very much, Sunil, for coming on to the Automated Podcast. It's great to have you here today to talk a little bit about robotic process automation, how automation is impacting organizations. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. So thanks for coming on today.
It's my pleasure, Mark, to be on with you. And it was fascinating to understand the perspective, what you brought in terms of the project management, automation, and the improvisation of the process. We just had a brief conversation before we started. So yeah, I'm excited. Let's see what we got.
Great. Well, the way that I like to start off with all of my guests is to get a little bit more of a personal understanding of where you're coming from. So of course, I'll have recorded kind of a pre-intro with your professional bio in the background. But what I'm curious about is like, what made you initially interested in automation or robotic process automation? Like, what was there an interesting case study, or was there an interesting episode, something like that that got you initially interested in this?
So it's very interesting. Sometimes, the great thing happens by accident. So about 4 years back in December, when we started, thought of starting Predikly, which stands for Prediction Likely, we wanted to be an AI solutions company. And I think we were too early for the AI because today, the way we look at AI, it's more like a service-based economy, which means you have got the APIs for anything and everything, and you don't need to worry about building anything from the core. Traditionally, right, the most of the AI projects are done not at a services level, but at a product level. And we wanted to build a services company. And that's when I got an introduction to co-founder of Automation Anywhere. And I met with him and they offered, why don't you attend our conference, which is happening on Monday. So I meet with him on Friday. I fly to New York on Sunday morning and I attend the first session, half sleepy because I have a jet lag. And I was like, okay, you know what? Sounds like this is very interesting because this is the way everything is folding together is going to change the world. Before I started Predikly, I was part of a venture fund where we interviewed about close to 2,000 companies across the globe. And I had got a view of where the world is moving towards. And then that's when I realized that automation is going to be something very, very prevalent.
Yeah.
And I felt that RPA is going to bring in an innovation in every company at a much inexpensive cost. They don't need to spend billions of dollars. And that's when, I got interested. And it was a small introduction, led to the journey of RPA.
Awesome. I always like the guests that describe kind of an event that happens kind of out of nowhere. It wasn't, pre-planned since you were 12 or something like that. It's interesting to hear. But maybe for the audience members, so I have had maybe one or two episodes that discuss RPA, but maybe for those that haven't heard about it before, you could maybe just give us a brief overview of what RPA actually stands for, what it is, and then we can kind of jump into the more interesting topics that we have pre-planned.
Sure. So if you look at RPA, which is an acronym for Robotic Process Automation, this is pure play and automation of the business processes. So in a very rudimentary definition wise, what does an RPA stands for is robotic process automation. Anything and everything what a human does, which is repetitive and mundane,
Mm-hmm.
using the platform, you can automate that. This is not something very new. I mean, this has been there for the longest period of time till the time we had the invention of the computer.
Mm-hmm.
It took evolution right from the beginning, where you automated a routine using some scripts. You automated your task, cobbling some macros together in Excel. I mean, that's as simple as every time I don't need to go and write the formula and do the calculation, right?
Yeah.
So think of this way. This is where we started putting the things together so that there is a more human efficiency. I mean, if you take it back into 1900s, right, when Ford put their first plant of assembly, or the Toyota when they put their first plant of assembly, it was automation of the human effort. I mean, imagine if till today, if you had to build every car single-handedly, putting the screws together,
Yeah.
a human being had to do it. There's no way you can build multiple cars and or multi-fold millions of car, and
Yeah.
the economy would have not been global. So RPA stands for robotic process automation, where you are improvising the efficiency using a platform which is helping you automate the repetitive and mundane task.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, the tasks that we're talking about are going to be predominantly digital tasks that employees are doing across a company, or does that also kind of impede on the manual tasks or processes, I guess, that employees are doing?
A very interesting question. Actually, if you look at, and I'll try to give an analogy because RPA is
Mm-hmm.
a very relatively newer term. So
Mm.
wherever given a talk or spoken, right, the analogies are helping. What Amazon did about 15 years back to their warehouses, the
Yep.
reason we today survive because what Amazon invested 15 years back in automating their warehouses, where they brought in physical robots.
Mm-hmm.
So the notion of robots in our mind is typically a physical robot. So when we take a robotic process automation, the very first thing comes in mind is, hey, are we talking about a physical robot?
Yeah.
Now, what here we are talking about is a software robot, and that's the reason you must have, listeners must have heard the concept called bot, B-O-T, bot.
Yep.
So the bots are nothing but the software part of the software automation, which means anything when a human does using a mouse click or a keyboard or a tab on the computer screen, that those tasks can be automated using a software, and those are called bots. So when we talk about RPA, it's predominantly uh, software only automation, wherever you do the task using mouse clicks, um, tabs, or any keystrokes.
Perfect, perfect. And I think the reason that RPA has grown in the last several years, I mean, even a decade or so, is because more and more of the work activities that people are doing across mostly the Western world have become more and more digitized, right? So, do you have maybe a sense as to like the scope of this? Like, is it like 90, maybe not 90, but something like 70% of all employees are now working within this digitized economy?
I think quantifying a scope of RPA
Mm-hmm.
is going to be, because we are in a very nascent stage. I had
Mm.
an opportunity to talk to about 34 industry leaders a couple of years back because I wrote an article for O'Reilly, and I did a industry report. Uh, in that, what I said was RPA or automation is a nine-piece puzzle, and we have just scratched only one piece of the
Mm.
puzzle, and there are like
Interesting.
still eight of them are still left out. If you look at the whole parameter of RPA in 2012, the RPA word was coined. It took us almost close to 7, 8 years to make it a mainstream conversation. And if you look at last 2 years, this has become a mainstream strategy conversation for most of the CIOs
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because it's on their top of mind. But predominantly, if you look at the evolution of automation, now what we are talking about RPA, you will start hearing very soon something called intelligence document processing. And that's where the AI comes into the picture.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And the next level of that is hyperautomation. So what is happening is everything is merging together right from your analytics versus your intelligence document processing and your rule-based automation is merging together, and it's going to be called hyperautomation. Coming back to your original question, that how do we quantify how much of time employees are spending digitally, in the remote world, you're
mm-hmm,
predominantly you are spending most of your time remote on your laptop, but the order of magnitude of repetitive mundane task is typically done at different department levels. So if you take any company, predominantly they will have either every company has to have an HR department.
yeah.
Everyone has to have a finance department. Everyone needs to have an IT department. Now, if you look at the product development a cycle where people needs to put an objective thinking, not subjective thinking, that's when the automation doesn't help much.
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm,
cannot have a bot write a very specialized program for you. But if I'm in a finance department and I receive invoices, I need to download them, I need to upload them, I need to pay them. That's pretty repetitive task without much of thinking. So you can think of any workload or task today, at least as we speak, as long as it's a rule based and there's not much
mm-hmm.
human thinking required, that could be automated. And most of the time, there are several departments within the organization, they have got this kind of task. You cannot quantify because it all depends upon how big is the company, what's the size of the department, and so on and so
Yeah.
forth.
Well, maybe that's a good segue into like where RPA is actually relevant for. So, I mean, like I work for a small company. Like we're still under 100 employees, and as far as I understand, in the entire company, there's not too many like very repetitive tasks. Maybe HR or the finance department, which is like one or two people, do some of these things. But I would assume that RPA would be much more relevant for say like a multinational or a large organization with hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of employees. Do you see maybe it being relevant for the small companies as well?
I mean, actually, it's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
As we stand today, most of the time when people are taking up an automation as an initiative, it's a top-down initiative, which means
Mm-hmm.
somebody from the higher up authority needs to make that decision. Most of the time, the repetitive task has two bottlenecks. One is a cost implication, and the second one is the agility of that process,
Mm.
which means if that a particular process doesn't get done, then all the subsequent process below that gets stuck. When you're a company of sub 100 people, your leadership is focused on operationalizing the company rather than making it more improvising or efficient a way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
There are very few lucky companies in the world like YouTube's when it was YouTube, or a WhatsApp where you're a 50 people company and get bought out by like a $19 billion. I mean, it
Right,
happens
right.
once in a lifetime. Or maybe we'll see a lot of crypto millennials, or we are seeing actually. Shiba Inu is another one.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so the point here is, when you're a smaller company, your line of focus is totally different. What we have seen incrementally, the SMB, which is like small medium businesses, if you are a company between like 2,500 to 7,500 people, automation is impacting you the largest. The reason
Mm.
is you are a small enough, you can make the faster decision. There is not much bigger hierarchy, but you are not able to hire many people. And from 100 million to jump to 150 to 200 million, and from 500 million to jump to $1 billion, you have not only the larger business coming in, but you need a ecosystem or shared service support, and automations could help. So the
Mm.
divisions like HR, where AP clerk, AR clerk could be of the help. In case of IT, right, it could be more around how many people are joining or onboarding, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I can talk about the specific industries and the use cases, but I
Yeah.
mean, I hope you get the point.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. But I actually would like to talk a little bit more about the specific industries, right? Because I think like when people are thinking about RPA or automation within an organization, from some of the listeners that I've heard previously, they don't think that their organization or their industry could be impacted by this too much, right? The way that I see it, it's like most organizations are not going to be left alone from automation, right? Like automation is going to be impacting most, if not all, type of industries and businesses as time goes on, and as these bots, or whether we move into the hyper automation world of mixed AI, it'll be easier to automate certain aspects of the business. But are there maybe like a couple key industries that are maybe more impacted now, or more easily impacted by RPA today?
Um, I'll take this question in two parts.
Okay.
If you're listening, and if you think that your industry is immune to automation, that's the first steps towards either you are in a very illusional world, or B, your industry is not even relevant anymore.
Hmm.
Um, Traditionally, if you have seen, most of the companies are scaled not because of the skill set, but because of the usage of the skill set at scale. And what technology has helped us is scale.
Mm-hmm.
You take an example of Uber. Today, Uber is Uber not because of the lots of drivers. The drivers are key ingredient,
Yeah.
but connecting them, technology has helped them scale it. Imagine if it was a manual process of interviewing everyone, onboarding everyone, or making a phone call to a specific place. There is no way you could have scaled it. I mean, if you
Yeah.
want to scale it, Uber from United States to India, the language barrier, setting up a call center, physical cost, operational cost. This is the first time in the world where I used to pay $120 from an airport to go back home, and I started paying like $60. In the hyperinflation world, the cost of something has gone down, which was predominantly unionized. So the
Mm-hmm.
point here is, when people tell me we don't need RPA, I tell them always that when iPhone was not there, people did not even know what could be
Right.
the use case.
Right.
The point here is you don't have automation today in house because you don't even know what could be another places. The beauty of automation today, what the way we are seeing is, um, some of the industry proven use cases are domain agnostic. So when we say domain agnostic, um, you run a company, you have vendors, you have suppliers, you get invoice, you pay them,
Mm-hmm.
you send invoice, you get paid. I mean, it does not matter whether you are in pharmaceutical company, or you are in entertainment or media company, or in steel manufacturing. At the end of the day, the balance sheet is always debit and credit. The financial processes are always AP and AR. Now, the only domain specificity might change is, for example, when we were doing a proof of concept for an EV, a
Mm.
charging company, they say, okay, since we are into the business of building the infrastructure, when we send equipments using FedEx, that's our expense account, and that's not a cost account, and we have to charge it to customers. Where when the internal FedEx comes in, I need to charge it as a cost center. That's your business rule. But at the end of the day, after applying no different than 27 or 30 business rules, at the end of the day, you need to do encoding of that particular record setting, that where it's going to be accounted for, how it's going to account it for, whether
Right.
I've paid the invoice or not. So at the end of the day, if you look at any company, the finance processes pretty much remain the same, plus minus few business rules. Number two, last week we were in a boardroom with 100-year-old. They make a lot of steel for United States.
Mm.
They are like a top two or top three companies in the in the United States. Now, when we were talking to them, for them, and they showed a process, and we were like, okay, you do this, you do this, and he said, oh yeah, you know it all. I said, yeah, I believe this is how the industry is working. He said, yeah, makes sense, because our industry is pretty straightforward. We build big equipment, so there are not many invoices come in, and this is how we need to do it. We were like, wow, it makes sense. If you take an HR process today, every
Mm.
company needs to hire. What they do, you open the requisition, get the approval of the requisition, You collect the resumes, you put it on your application tracking system, you approve it, and then there's an offer letter which goes out. This is a standard process. It's not going to change across the industry. Employee onboarding. I mean, the only challenge could be you could have Okta versus you could have Microsoft Dynamics, or you not Dynamics, but you can have single sign-on from Microsoft, or you
Mhm.
could have like Ping Identity, or you could have few things from ServiceNow. But at the end of the day, employee onboarding is employee onboarding.
Yeah.
So these are a very, very common denominator, and what I call it, not even low hanging fruit. These are the fruits lying on the ground. You need to just go and pick them up. You don't even need to put effort. You can put like a 10-year-old kid and they can start picking those fruits. So the point here is, if you think that your industry is immune to automation, this is the right time to start thinking and thinking it hard. Are you relevant as an industry, or are you relevant as a domain?
That's I think that's a perfect wake up call for anybody that's listening. That I have had these conversations where they were thinking that, oh, maybe my industry is immune to that. So thank you very much for that. One of the questions that I had when you were speaking was, so I mean, you're talking to, say, a steel manufacturer, which is kind of one of these legacy organizations that you don't typically associate with, hyper digital, cutting edge, implementing a lot of AI. To what extent are these companies digitizing? I would assume that COVID would have had quite a massive effect on a number of these companies trying to implement like new digital processes, new automation processes. Is that something that you see now? Like, was there a period before, March 2020 where the companies were not necessarily thinking about automation or digitization, and now you see with Predikly, there's like newfound interest, newfound desire, or maybe even necessity to have a lot of these processes automated?
Um, I would divide this conversation into two parts. One is a digitization piece of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Um, did COVID accelerate digitization? Yes, the portion of digitization was accelerated because of COVID. I mean, I was talking to this co-founder of a security company, and he was like, Sunil, before, for us to secure the perimeter, it was a building address and four walls of that building address.
hmm.
But the moment people started working from home, that building wall perimeter changed to the entire world.
Yeah.
They had no choice but to go away from the physical VPN to a software VPN.
Hmm.
Imagine if there was no
Hmm.
software VPN invented, most of the people would have not been able to work. So, in my opinion, the biggest invention after internet is VPN, because that gave us a flexibility about 15 or 20 years back to work anywhere remotely. Now, coming back to your point, in terms of the people, have people taken a digital journey? Most of the people did start taking the a digital journey way back about 8 to 10 years back, and I
Hmm.
I would highly applaud Mark Benioff for
Hmm.
doing Salesforce, because that was the first in a true digital aspect of economy, where people started dumping their on-prem CRM system to go to cloud, and
Hmm.
that was the
Hmm.
first migration of the a SaaS product, and people trusted the data. The second part was, so if you take the digital transition of every company, the first part is moving your key assets or operations on cloud by means of Salesforce, Workday, or any web HR, or any of the companies where you can host outsource your companies. Number one. The
Hmm.
second part was not owning the infrastructure. So moving from capex to opex, or moving from opex to capex, depending upon how you do the accounting, and get a larger depreciation from a tax benefit perspective. So people started moving that infrastructure. In during COVID, that became more prevalent, and that's when AWS or Google, and if you look at their, or Microsoft for the matter of fact, if you look at their pieces, right, they went through a rock up north balance sheets.
Hmm.
Now, so that was already started beginning. Of course, COVID started doing it more, and now the biggest migration was security software. Like if you take Palo Alto Networks, Ping Identity, or CrowdStrike, and so on and so forth. So these were the companies people had to embrace it. Now, This is where people have just barely got settled in remote. They've understood the importance of bringing these
Mm,
external hardwares as an infrastructure services, external softwares and everything. Now they're realizing that some of the tasks which were heavily dependent upon people to be in office, those are the tasks we need to automate so that people don't need to we don't need to rely them to be in office and
mm,
so on and so
mm.
forth. I think so. As part of the automation as a journey, digitization has been there for many years, and the process automation, which is part of the digital transformation, is taking steam. In next 18 or to 24 months you will see a lot more.
Yeah. Okay, very interesting. So I mean, you touched on a little bit there about like how the employees were impacted a little bit. Maybe we can take COVID out of the equation here, but generally, whenever we're talking about automation, there's of course a large amount of fear associated to it. Like, oh, if automation is going to be put into my organization, then I or my colleagues will be made redundant, and we will lose our jobs. How exactly have you seen with Predikly, with your clients, the impact on the jobs of the people that start of the organizations that start to take up robotic process automation?
I mean, it's a human behavior, right? A threat is always a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Insecurity is always an insecurity. There's very little human behavior you can make change. Automation brings that fear for sure. I mean, there have been cases where we have gone and talked to the CIOs, and CIO says, "No way, I cannot take this
Oh,
project
really?
because I may have to, let go some people, and we are
Mm,
not ready to do that. I might as well keep them because they are in their 60s, so another couple of years, and then I'll pick it up, or maybe
mm,
another 5 years I'll pick it up." Um, when we walk into a room and when we start having conversation with leadership, the conversation is never about headcount reduction.
mm,
If the conversation is about headcount reduction, we are not collaborating with the right customer. The customer is very balance sheet, bottom line oriented, which means they're going to just look at a process from not from improvisation and efficiency perspective, but it's going to be more like how much saving I'm doing just at get go, not from innovation and a cultural change perspective.
mm-hmm.
Because when you bring in an automation, it's a cultural change. You're bringing in a culture of innovation in. I mean, if you take today, Facebook recently changed the company name from Facebook to Meta,
Right.
and they're going to say they're going to spend $10 billion. If somebody had that whole a non-progressive mindset that I don't want to spend $10 billion. I'm just happy with what I'm making it, and we're just going to continue. They would have never taken that a big bite, saying,
Yeah.
"Okay, we are just going to make a larger impact on this." Automation is not just about bringing in a technology; it's about bringing in an innovation and a culture. Now, when we walk into a room and when we have a conversation with leadership, our conversation is never about the headcount. Our
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
conversation is
mm-hmm.
about how do we make your employees more strategic than tactical.
Yeah.
Today, a person who's receiving invoice, downloading it and copy pasting it, and making sure going to thousands of invoices on a daily basis, how do we make him or her that rather than going through 1,000 invoices, she has to go through only maybe 10 invoices, 20 invoices, or 500 invoices.
Mm-hmm.
So we are making her more decision maker rather than an administrator. I think that's typically our conversation. And we have seen every time that, hey, can you really make an employee strategic because of their background education? And our conversation is always everyone
Mm,
in the company at their level has an ability to think strategically. You cannot discount somebody just because they are making $25 an hour. You cannot discount them that they cannot think strategically. The reason they are good at their job because they do think strategically at a critical juncture. And for them, that critical juncture could be only invoice of $600,
mm.
wherein the CEO, when he makes his critical the decision, it could be $600 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the reason you are getting paid at a certain level. So our argument is always you can make everyone strategic. That's what you do with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
You make them you have them make certain decision to start having a strategic conversation with them rather than just tactical. So, I mean, I don't see that as a threat. But if you look at historically, right,
Yeah,
people who used to do the horse cart, when the cars came in, they were threatened.
of course.
The jobs were lost. But if I was a horseman, I would say, okay, you know what? I understand the routes very well. I understand the criticality of the routes. Maybe I can go and help the company build a better tires because I
Mm-hmm.
understand how the roads work, or I can help them understand how long does it take to travel and what are the critical problems, or I can go and help in an ecosystem industry and say this is the juncture where we can open up a restaurant because now people don't need to have they will have a larger travel time and so on and so forth. So skills are never wasted. If you
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
honestly put an attempt in a skill, those can be repurposed. I think that's how I have seen the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, this is also one of the main ideas that keeps coming up in the podcast, right? It's not necessarily that automation will displace or eradicate jobs. Is that it might displace certain activities within that job, but then there will be, as you said, like an opportunity to think more strategically for the employee, or there could even be some sort of upskilling process where they're able to learn new skills to apply to kind of a new position. Going to your horse cart example, I remember reading that I think a lot of the suppliers for the horse carts back in the day, they actually became the suppliers for the automotive industry. All they did was they changed the materials, but they still had a lot of connections with other suppliers down the supply chain. So there was like a transition. Of course, some of them were eradicated, but I think that as long as you're able to think a little bit, strategically, think a little bit with some foresight, you're able to kind of navigate those changes as they come. And I'm sure that you're aware as well, like as time goes on, as technology continues to grow exponentially in the case of today, that those transformations are going to happen faster and faster. So I think that the mindset that people need to have is, of course, this strategic thinking or this foresight thinking in order to
Uh,
avoid.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. The Kodak,
yeah,
Kodak is a great example, right?
yeah.
We grew up on that brand name as a Kodak, and nobody would have thought about 20 years back. I came to the United States 20 years back. I would have never thought in my wildest dream that, it will become an obsolete in 5 years from then, because I still remember I used to take the print, send it back home to my parents so that they can have the view of the world here. So yeah, I mean, if you don't innovate, I mean, you're going to be left out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very interesting. Um, so one of the things that I always like to do, of course, in this podcast is to think a little bit forward, right? To have a little bit of strategic foresight. So I mean, you're deeply entrenched in the RPA world. What do you see coming about in the next 10 years or so? You talked a little bit about hyper automation at the beginning. Is that really where things are going to go in, say, the next 10 years? More AI being implemented, like these RPA bots becoming better, smarter, able to do more activities within these organizations. Like, what's your kind of vision for this?
So in my opinion, 10 years is a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
uh, the scale have changed, and the scale have changed on a logarithmic scale. It's like we say one dog year is 7 human years.
Mm-hmm.
So the innovation is going dog years, which means
Mm-hmm.
in a good way. Which means is, if you take 3 years back or 4 years back, you would have never thought that EV vehicles are going to be the trend, and people
Yeah.
will make a strategic decision that by 2030 we are going to stop making those, you know, petrol or diesel vehicles. In my opinion, 10 years is a super super long behavior. Uh, if I have my way, and if I'm thinking right, 10 years, bank will eradicate. You will not have banking system.
Mm-hmm.
The financial institution will have a different way of looking at it. The liquidity availability in the market is not going to be the border confined. It's going to be a borderless economy where the liquidity is going to be so much huge that the money is going to start coming cheaper and cheaper. And when the money has become cheaper and cheaper, innovation has gone to the next tranche and or next level. Automation is going to go to the same route. I mean, we can have altogether different conversation about
Yeah.
why I think that it's going to be a borderless financial economy, and why people will have a trillion, not trillions. I mean, they will have. I don't even know I don't even know what's after trillion, like zillions and zillions and whatever it takes, right? Money at their disposal at much inexpensive cost. In terms of the automation, right? What we see at least, or what I see at least in next couple of years for sure, is people have the platform have robust build it very base robust for RPA, which was not the case 3 years back.
Mm-hmm.
People invested into intelligent document processing, which was not the case in a couple of years back, and we are seeing those are getting robust. I think the next evolution is going to be the integration of the AI services on top of whatever the rule based are. So today, if I have a rule based automation, click here, click there, and then just do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a perfectly fine. Human in the loop is working fine. I think the next evolution is going to be more AI integration. So it could be more like yeah, building integrating with the ecosystem so that wherever humans were making certain decisions, those could be automated. So for the greatest example could be way back in the past, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You when doctors needed to look at a specific report or X-rays. Today, AI does most of it, and then doctors make only strategic decision where there's an anomaly. Uh, Process automation will go through that cycle where most of your back-end processes like your HR processes will be by default automated. You will not be taking credit for that, but the next level of automation would come into more around integrating the process efficiency between the shop floor and the integration piece, which means today what happens is most of the time what inventory you have at hand is a manual task. Not many people have automated it, but at the same time I do not even know which inventory is in transit and where it is. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, the
Mm-hmm.
next level of innovation would be, think of this way, that if I am a manufacturer today, or I let's say I'm in a low voltage industry and I've got like 10 houses to be built. Today I can make the decision of the commitment based on the whatever the physical inventory what I have it. But imagine the world where I can integrate my source, which is my supplier's inventory. If I can integrate the transportation, where I can say exactly where where in the transit that particular product is, and then what happens is I can make a judgment saying that after 3 months on 3 days, I will have these many switches in my inventory. I can take larger orders, and that's where the
Mm-hmm.
whole efficiency will increase. Inefficiency will reduce, efficiency will increase, and your turnaround time is going to be faster, and that will revolve the economy at a scale.
Very interesting. And you're saying that this is within just a couple of years, maybe not even 10 years out.
Yeah, I mean, think of this way,
Yeah.
right? Today, I'll give you an example. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
um, today all these pieces are there in
Yeah.
bits and pieces, but the biggest challenge is the integration of those data sets.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
RP as a platform gives you that opportunity to integrate that data. So, in my true opinion, the power of automation is not about automating the task, but is the power is automating the task across heterogeneous systems
Mm.
or integrating them across. It's a greatest innovation, much inexpensive integration layer which helps you automate the process. So today, I as a individual company, if I'm a supplier, or I'm a supplier, I already have my inventory system in place.
Mm-hmm.
If I am your vendor, I have my inventory system. If I am going and selling it, I exactly know what's my demand looks like, what's my pipeline looks like. All I need to do is put a layer together at my convenience and for my need to just tell me whether it's in transit, integrate with FedEx or integrate with any of the transportation company. So exactly I know where it is standing. I mean, if you look at today, right, one of the biggest project Uber was,
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to co-founder of Uber, and the biggest problem today, what we are facing is in supply chain. It's not about, the containers are not moving. Containers are stuck at port.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
today, a truck driver goes and stands on the port and spent like 5-6 hours just figuring out whether his container is going to get offloaded today.
Yeah.
What if you make that as an efficient process? Yeah, the way today your Uber app tells you where exactly your driver is, and you can make that step out at 4 a.m. in the morning, so you don't need to stand in the cold weather.
Yep. Yep.
If you can do that, if that intimation of where the product is and which container it is in. If you can do that, that's a process improvisation efficiency, and those are happening as we speak, and it's just matter of time. Of course, COVID has accelerated the growth of these automation integration, and people started seeing more benefit, and people have saved a lot of money in over last
Mm,
few years, so people are going to spend it.
perfect. Okay, very clear. I do see that the time is winding down here. Maybe a way to end the discussion is to make it a little bit more practical. So I know we've already discussed Predikly and the work that you guys do, but let's say that there's an organization out there that is looking to start to think about automation, right? What are some of maybe the first steps that they would want to put into place to act on this very interesting technology and the kind of efficiencies and benefits that come out from it?
Sure. So, I mean, there are quite a few Forbes article I've written on this particular topic. Where do you start, or
Mm,
whether do you know if RPA is the right, place for you to start?
yeah.
And the most of the answer is yes, RPA is the right place for you to start. Now, the question is, how do we start it? I think the very first thing is at a leadership level. If I'm the CIO, CFO, CEO, depending on what category of the organization you're running, I need to make that conscious decision that yes, I'm going to spend at least, maybe like 0.5% of my budget this year to identify that inefficiencies, and I'm going to just go ahead and identify why there are inefficiencies. So I might just go to every head, and the slam dunks are CFOs, CMOs. Slam dunks are like CROs, or I might just go to, my chief health officer, or I might just go to my chief data officer and ask them what are the biggest pain point what you have for
Mm,
the next growth cycle. And then and then what we do is something called discovery, which means you just go and identify the processes which takes the longest period of time, and scale them over like three core metrics, like core metrics, cost metrics, and efficiency metrics. Which means is, hey, you know what, is it I've got like 20 people. Out of 20 people, I've got like cumulative 800 hours a week, and people are spending on a specific process or a task 20% of their time. Is If I
mm,
can just improvise order of magnitude by 10%, how much I'm going to really save? Because is it going to contribute to the growth of the next stage of the vision what I'm setting? I think the biggest part, if I'm the CEO or the CFO, or I'm on the authority, I'll put a vision together. What's my next
mm,
5-year vision? I need to grow, whether it's a customer satisfaction is my vision, or is it my revenue growth is my vision, or is it my profitability or the margin is my vision. Based on that, all the bottlenecks can be identified, and some of those bottlenecks either can be identified by the process improvisation, and those are some of the discovery sessions typically we run through at a different department level. And I mean, we are running a discovery session with a steel manufacturer right now, which is all we're just going is we are interviewing like a 6 different department heads,
mhm,
and
mhm.
we're just talking through where you are stuck and what are the different things. And then about 40 processes have come out, and we have identified 12 of them, and they're going to save a little over like a few millions every year, to about close to like a 30 million over 3 years time.
That's yeah, those are some big numbers, especially if you're a smaller company. No, that's great. I think it makes it very clear for
Actually,
anybody in the
these
audience.
companies are not even larger companies actually. So
There we go. There we go.
they are themselves surprised that they don't even do like a north of $500 million as the revenue. But when these numbers came in, so they are at a point, hey, even if I just save like 20% or 30 or 40 or 50% of this money, this is a big
Hmm.
money for me. Because if I can prove to my management that my division can help you save $6 million or $10 million over next 3 years, and
Hmm.
it cumulatively three department comes in, and they'll say, hey, that means that's almost close to like 10% of our revenue over next few years, right? That's a big money.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a perfect place to stop because I think it really kind of uh, puts the idea into people's minds that there could be some large savings, some real benefits to organizations if automation is, of course, implemented properly. Sunil, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast. I will have, of course, your website and your LinkedIn profile up on the show notes. Is there any other way that you want people to follow you, reach out to you, get in touch?
I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn.
Okay.
That gives me, one authoritatively looking at the person's profile and making the decision that how best I can help. It's not about I don't want to help, but if I'm able to help, then I want to just be the best judge of that, because I just want to make sure. I come from an automation background. I come from an efficiency background. So every minute spent is very important. So I just want to make sure that I'm able to help. If I'm not, I'll have somebody else within the network help you out. So feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn. And if you have liked this conversation, please let us know. If you feel we are smoking pots, let us know and we'll do the course correction.
Perfect. And maybe you can also say you also have a podcast, right? You have 10, 12 episodes out. Do you want to also mention that and tell people where they can find it?
Oh, that's yeah. So I've
I'm
never
happy to.
publicized that. Yeah, we never publicized that. But yeah, we run a podcast called Silicon Valley Tech Behind the Scene, and in that podcast, we bring in the unsung hero, where people who have made some technological decisions which were very very important. Like, so for example, Steve Jobs came and said, "Okay, I want to build an iPhone," but that was a great vision, but the actual execution was done by the people on the ground.
Right.
So we tend to bring in people who are who are part of bigger journey. So we got people who helped us buy Steve Jobs their first home. We had people who built the first billion-dollar company, women-owned billion-dollar company. We interviewed 1997 Miss Universe pageant.
Okay.
She was the first one from Caribbean island. So we've got interesting people, but yeah, it's nothing related to technology. It's more like a Silicon Valley tech behind the scene. You have made certain decisions in life which were like very encouraging and interesting for the company. We would love to have you on the board.
Terrific. Well, I'm happy to also put that into the show notes. Sunil, thank you very much for coming on. It was a great pleasure. I think it was also very interesting for me to hear a little bit more about RPA, which as somebody who works in a small company, we don't really deal with it. So it's always really interesting for me to hear a little bit of a deeper understanding of what that is, and I think it'll be very interesting and useful for the audience members as well. So thanks again for that.
Thank you so much, Mark. I truly appreciate it, and looking forward to listening back to this show.
Absolutely. Thanks. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast and the conversations here, the best way to do this is to go onto Apple Podcasts and leave a review, as it helps the algorithm to reach out to new listeners and brings the show to them. Also, feel free to check out the website, automatedpodcast.org, where you can find the show notes for each episode, written articles on the themes of the podcast, and a library of resources on the topic of emerging tech and automation. Also, if you want to reach out and leave any feedback or you have any questions about the podcast or any of the conversations, there are general contact links such as email, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. for you there on the website. And finally, for those of you that want more than just an audio conversation, the video recordings are now going to be up on YouTube for the newer conversations, so feel free to check out the videos by searching for Automated Podcast on YouTube, where of course you can like and subscribe if you prefer to support the podcast that way.
The Automated Podcast.